Hey everyone, and welcome to the first episode in the 11th series of Shade with me, Lou Mensah. And today we're joined by the artist Matthew Krishanu. Born in Bradford in 1980, he paints deeply moving and atmospheric, pared-back compositions, including scenes from his life, particularly his childhood years in Bangladesh, growing up with his brother and their parents. These paintings are so utterly captivating. As a viewer, I could not help but be drawn into these worlds depicted by Matthew and finding myself participating in the questions raised about childhood, religion, race, power, and the legacies of empire. Matthew's work often explores how representations in the canon of Western art have shaped our collective unconscious around questions of race and gender. And in this episode, we are in conversation about Matthew's current exhibition, The Bell Breaks, at the Camden Art Centre, and he tells us how the works engage with ideas and experiences of childhood, history, and memory. Thank you, Matthew, for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here on Shade Podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's lovely to have you, and let's launch straight in to talk about your work. I've really enjoyed researching and doing a deep dive into your work. I was particularly interested in the personal memories that you share through this work and the emotional states and also the histories and the art histories too. And you often draw on scenes from your childhood, and a formative childhood experience was when you moved to the UK from Bangladesh with your family. But in contemplating how you bring these histories and these memories in, I was finding myself unpicking the effects of empire, and in your case, the story of partition, religion, colonialism. What I'm drawn to in your works is the way that they're founded in this biography of yours, the way that you use your personal history to tell our shared stories. And it's a very much bringing in of the audience as well, who also share these stories with you. They're very inviting and enveloping, and I just found a safety in that I don't find a lot looking at other works where these stories are explored. And I just wonder if you can just talk a little bit about how you've developed this way of creating this safe, inviting, comforting kind of visual space that nonetheless tells these stories and histories of displacement.
Yeah, that's lovely that you should say it. I think it's very much the intention that this space is inviting for the viewer and for the viewer to project their own feelings in relation to the paintings, because the paintings aren't anecdotal. It's not like I'm telling stories about my life in a particular way. It's more about mapping scenes which people can see sort of sense of recognition or familiarity. I think particularly people from the Global South or people who have travelled areas of the Global South and then can recognise the flora, the fauna, the faces, the brown skin, the black hair, all the things which are so normal to us that have lived in that hemisphere, and of course is othered in Western representation. So when you walk around the National Gallery, you'll be seeing painting after painting of white Europeans, generally wealthy white Europeans, and at best you'll see black and brown people as servants or worse, slaves. So to place my or our story, our existence, our being as the central part of the narrative is really the invitation to it. And more so, the idea of these two boys that grew up in Bangladesh, which are ostensibly myself and my older brother. But I also think that idea of when it's the invitation through the eyes of a child, it's perhaps even more open for the viewer, because everyone has resonances with their own childhood, atmospheres that they draw on, senses of play and freedom, and all of those are woven into the work. So that's very much the opening register of hopefully the experience of walking into the show, that yes, it is like, let me take you by the hand and guide you round and see how you feel.
I was reading more about these rapid fire sketches that you created at the inception stage of this show, which was your process of working things out. It made me think about how, as audiences, we are working these things out with you. And I just wanted to think about that cycle of healing. Are you aware of that when the show is out? Do you get any responses from audiences? Talk to this, or are you aware of this process happening?
It is a word people have used, yes. And actually, some of the most poignant conversations for me have been encountering people I don't know who may be sitting on one of the benches in the space, making notes, realise I'm the artist, bring me into their world and their reasons. Because, of course, there are many reasons why the works might move someone, because I map out so much of the terrain of my own life, whether that is childhood and landscape, whether that is the world of my parents who worked in the church. And in a particular instance I'm thinking of, it was a woman who had been brought up in a sort of Christian cult and was becoming an artist herself. The pull, the idea of exploring something that was very familiar and perhaps difficult, but in a gentle way, I think in an open way, because each of my paintings, whether it's the Mission series or the Two Boys series, or indeed the series of my late wife and my daughter, all of them, I think, have that idea of holding. Let's hold a space between me and you, the viewer. Let me give you an entry point to this. And that's only really where autobiography comes in for me. It's not to tell you my story so much as to give you authority, access into something I have known, something I've cared about, something I've loved. For instance, the fact if I paint a woman preaching in the painting Preaching, that is in fact my mother. So obviously that will come into the way that I handle the paint, how I handle that sense of recognition of a specific person, but keep it open enough. Or indeed when it's the white man, the white priest in those painting series, Blessing and Ordination, on either side of the Preaching painting, that's in fact my father. So I'm able to at once potentially keep the viewer at bay if they have, say, a difficult, troubled relationship with representations of religion, but also keep open the door of something which is a very personal, human, immediate connection to the work. So yes, it is a holding space for the viewer, and really one which is renewed with every person that walks in, because I cannot control, nor do I want to control, how they respond to the works.
And thinking about that holding, we're also held by the landscapes that feature in the work. And throughout your work, water and natural landscapes are central to a lot of the paintings. They also provide like an expanse of colour into the paintings, but this additional character, this presence that evokes this feeling of stillness and sometimes this surreal sense of grandeur as well. This is particularly the case for me when I was looking at your House of God series, where they take centre stage and they feature as signs in your visual system, this mapping, almost as characters in the overall narrative. And I was thinking in particular the paintings that featured water, there's the kind of twinning that's happening or mirroring going on. For example, from the paintings that were depicting your childhood in Bangladesh with your brother, and in particular the beautiful paintings of your daughter and your late wife in Epping Forest. This balancing and this mirroring was really interesting, and I wondered if you could talk on that.
I've thought often about the idea of weaving together different elements of my life, different elements of times, places, people that I have loved. And really for me, the unique quality of painting is it operates in the present tense. When you watch a film of someone, you know that has already passed. When you see a photograph, often you can date the style of the hair or the look or even the way that the camera works to a decade or more specifically a couple of years. Whereas painting is more open than that. When you look at a Rembrandt painting, for instance, one that inspired the painting of my daughter in the sea in Southend in London, the Rembrandt painting operates as if it were painted just now. Sure, we've got art historical ideas of how we can place that in Dutch painting styles and so on of the century, but really the immediacy of a brush held and moved across the canvas, leaving the trace of the artist's hand, is what makes it so immediate. And really it's things like that which echo and weave throughout the series. So whether I'm painting something from even a few months ago in some of the works on paper, scenes in Epping Forest with my daughter, or back to when my late wife was very ill with cancer and still alive, and we visited Epping Forest for the last time, where she's depicting holding a tree that my daughter is climbing. Or whether we go back 3-4 decades to, say, a painting right next to the one of my daughter in the sea. There's a painting of my brother as a child in a lake or a river in Bangladesh. But both can operate in the present tense, that it's not a nostalgic picture of the past, but it is essentially those elements. Child, with a specific interiority and sense of life, with a specificity of having brown skin, dark eyes, black hair. One a girl, one a boy, one in London, one in Dhaka, Bangladesh. But both are in the same time zone when you look at them, when you apprehend them for the first time in the show. And I love that idea of weaving together different times, different places, much in the way we naturally do every night in our sleep, when dreams overlap, and even people that may have died decades ago can return as if in the present tense, as if they had never died. And really that's the magic for me, the alchemy of painting what you love and harnessing through holding a brush, through holding materials, through spreading them across the surface, letting them run, letting them drip, not trying to hold too tightly, but just enough to give an entry point, to allow that person, the spirit of them in a way, to enter the work, and therefore allow the viewer to have that sense of familiarity, of recognition of a person, a place known and dearly cared for.
The title of the exhibition, The Bell Breaks, this was used as a metaphor for the tension that you were exploring in the process of creating these works. And you were talking about the bough, the tree is something that can hold us or it may break. I'd love to know more about the process of working out that tension through the process of creating the works, but also the personal, like the interior process of putting the show together.
Yeah, the title came out really of a solo exhibition I had at Javeri Contemporary Gallery last summer in Mumbai, in India. And as I was mapping out what I wanted to paint for it, I knew I wanted to paint banyans. I painted smaller banyan trees, and banyan trees, for all those in the global south, will probably know they grow up. Then vines grow down, they reroot, grow up again, and one tree can become a whole forest. For me, it's a very resonant metaphor of rooting, of spreading, of regrowth, of new life. And I also wanted to show in India paintings of my late wife from visits that she and I had taken to India, particularly around the time that I proposed to her in Agra in India, and visits we'd had to my family there. I wanted to weave together different time zones from my childhood, but also my adult life, but they were all woven together with this conceptual idea of being out on a limb, where you go as far as you go and you test the branch, but you don't know if it will hold you or if it will break. And of course, anyone that has experienced loss or grieving knows that feeling deeply, that feeling of potential shattering of one's life, the potential fall to an end, really, and that's how it often feels. To be out on a limb tied together that show, and it wove together beautifully, really, for me, to have paintings that were metaphorically, through the handling of paint, exploring those different areas of my life. So when it came to this exhibition, I knew I already wanted to bring together the paintings of the religious interiors, which my adult parents had inhabited while we were children in Bangladesh. They worked for the church there, alongside the paintings of my brother and myself freely in the landscape, and then weave together again paintings of my late wife, paintings of my daughter, all together. And I was thinking of the Rockabye Baby nursery rhyme, and particularly the line, when the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, down will come baby, cradle and all. And I thought of Cradle and All as a title, thinking of cradle as a civilization, cradle as the genesis, really, of babies, which are a leitmotif in a way through the paintings, whether it's the priest and baby in the mission room, or the gentle paintings of paper of my wife holding my baby not long after she had born. But then I was taken back to the tree and the banyans, and I wanted to create the banyans at a larger scale than I'd ever painted before. And I wanted them to appear as if in a forest that people could visit and enter and experience that sense of being out on a limb, the precarity of exploration, whether that's psychological or practical, physical exploration of climbing a tree, but also the intimacy of holding, so much so that the baby being held by the mother feels no insecurity. It's a place of utmost care, yet punctured by the knowledge that, of course, even a relationship as intimate as that can be torn apart, which are then explored in the Epping Forest paintings, where indeed my daughter is now more independently climbing a tree high up in the limbs of the tree, and my wife is merely channeling her energies through the tree by touching it, as if the branches, like the roots beneath, are all connected together in a way suggesting a flow of life forms. So through all of that, the idea of the bough breaks, both a bough that can break and bring about endings, bring about closure, bring about despair and grief, but also within the breaking of every bough, the burning of every tree, there is always the hope of renewal, that something else, as nature always does after the worst atrocities, as we're seeing in the world even now, we know that eventually nature does regrow anew. And so the term the bough breaks holds that as well. The suggestion, the hope of renewal, as well as the knowledge that things do all eventually come to an end.
And this sense of renewal and looking forward, I'd be really interested to just hear a little bit about how putting this show together, how your practice has developed through that, how that's informed how you're looking forward, what you're looking forward to, what new works. I know that you're showing in LA later on in the year.
Well, first of all, there's never a sense of a show being a finishing point of any series or body of work. There are so many other trajectories or branches, if you like, of the practice. There's so much material. The drawings that we've shown, the works on paper, there are between 30 and 40 works on paper in the show, but then there are well over 1,000 of works of paper in my studio. And there are also paintings which we didn't choose to show at Camden Arts Centre, but are ready to take new forms in future shows, including in Los Angeles this autumn, most likely opening in October at Tanya Leighton Gallery. In that exhibition at the moment, my thinking is more about the interiors that I've developed partly in this show as well, which includes beds, four-poster beds, which are very typical in India and in Bangladesh. And in a way, the bed is a sense a place of a holding space. The writer of the file note, which is available on the Camden Arts Centre website, it's the exhibition text, Bidisha Mamata, writes exquisitely about how in my paintings the only time the figures lose their tension is in sleep, which I really loved. And I like that idea of the interiority, the most interior, if you like, the space of sleep, the space of beds. And potentially I may have a counterpoint of something of the natural world as well, interior and exterior. That's the framing. And most recently, I've met a wonderful writer and critic, professor of English at UCLA, Anahid Nesessian, and she'll be writing the exhibition text and be in conversation with me as well. So already the personal experiences of my own life through those that I talk to about the show, including Tanya Layton, or even how the texts and the themes are framed, are already very much in development. And while this show may be closing on 23rd of June, already I'm very much looking forward to not just the LA show, but further shows coming up in Naples, in Italy, in New York, and again in other parts of the UK. So there's always a lot on the go.
Fantastic. We look forward to hearing more about those, and thank you so much for a beautiful conversation and sharing with us the process of your artistic life. It feels like such a privilege. I just thank you so much. It's just enriching for all of us, Matthew.
Thank you so much, Lou. I've loved your questions and loved the intimacy of this conversation.
Hey, it's Lou, just hopping on to thank you for listening to this conversation. I loved hearing Matthew talk on the centrality of childhood within his practice, their emotional evocations and the personal, colonial and emotional lines of history that they trace. The Bell Breaks is on at Camden Arts Centre for just a couple more days until June the 23rd, and Matthew's forthcoming solo exhibition will show at Tanya Layton in LA in the autumn of this year. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Subscribe to Shade Podcast and listen to all the episodes in this series. Also explore Shade Art Review on Substack, joining the art-curious listeners like you receiving art listings, comment, artist spotlight features and guest writing. Sign up today to receive your 20% off the annual membership. This series was produced and hosted by me, Lou Mensah. It was mixed by Maylee Evans, and the music was composed for Shade Podcast by Brian Jackson. I'll see you next time.